Welcome back to another episode of Cold Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. Fitz, how are you?
I am doing well today, Ray. How are you?
Outstanding, sir. Thank you for asking. Our guest today has a background in forensic linguistics, similar to my co-host Fitz, and she hails all the way from Norway. Christina Yuan, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you.
Well,
Did I
thank you
get
so
your name
much.
right?
Well, yes, I have to say you did. I'm pretty impressed. I mean, a lot of people are struggling to get it correct, but it's a pleasure to be here with the two of you, and I'm very excited to be a part of this episode today.
Well, thanks for being here.
Let me say up front, we've had about 50 different episodes now on Cold Red with 50 different guests, one or two repeats, but they're usually in law enforcement, they're former law enforcement, they're victims of crimes, or they've committed crimes. We've actually had a few convicted felons, murderers on the show in earlier seasons, but of course they had a defense for doing it. But Christine, you don't fit any of those categories. Let's just put it out there, how did you and I ever meet?
Well, to be honest, we never physically met,
True.
yes, but we have had quite a lot of interaction because I have been your student throughout my study in forensic linguistics at Penn University. So we've had a lot of dialogue and we've connected, of course, about crime and linguistics, but we've had a lot of things in common. And so one day you just invited me to join the show because I've been working in a case or a forensic linguistics case in my master's degree, which has led me on this show.
Yeah, in fact, I read your master's thesis, and it's about a very interesting kidnapping of a woman in Norway, which didn't get too much attention, at least in the US, and I had never heard of it until you had mentioned it. And those types of kidnappings, we'll get into that shortly, but they're so rare, kidnappings for profit. And we have some examples in the US that started out that way, but really weren't. So we're going to get into that case and the facts of the case, as well as some analytical work you did, working sort of not directly, but adjacent with the police, but in Norway. But let me say that you were an excellent student, and some of my teachings are theoretical, as you know, but I get early on into exercises and sort of pragmatic approaches to forensic linguistics, and you did great on every one of those exercises. So whatever analysis we have coming up of the ransom letters in this kidnapping case, I think we'll learn a lot from it. So thanks for
Time
being
out
my
here a minute.
student.
Time
Well,
out. Chris,
I will say that I learned from the best, so thank you, Jim.
oh my goodness. Wait a
And
minute. He's not going to be able to get his head outside the screen here. Christina, hold on. I gotta ask the question here. You mean you were his student at
One of
Penn
them.
West University, or was his student at Penn West
yes,
University? Well,
correct.
I know a little bit about forensics and linguistics, a little bit, not very much. But I gotta ask you this: when you're studying language, don't you always look at body language and movements of people as well?
You know what? That is an excellent question. And I think as you discover more of linguistics, you realize that there's such a strong connection between what is spoken and, body language as a whole. You can look at facial mimics, you can look at prosody, the tone. There's so much you can evaluate and assess in connection to the language that you should never separate it completely from each other, in my opinion.
All right.
Christine, you'll get to learn
Don't
from
go there.
Ray.
Don't
This
go
was a
there.
setup. This was a setup question. Now
Don't
It's
here
go there. He
comes the
knows what's
punchline.
coming. He knows what's coming. I have to ask you, being that, and you've had a lot of interaction, give us a scoop on Jim. Give
Well,
us
you
a
know
scoop.
what?
Yeah.
I will definitely give you the scoop, and I have nothing but good words to say about Jim. He has been a fantastic teacher. He has been patient. He's been encouraging. And I think that, he actually really took the time to explain things. And I really felt that, nothing was too insignificant, or he was always very accessible, available, and just very friendly and great sense of humor. So I'm giving him 2 thumbs up, 10 out
But
of
what did
10.
his body language say?
His body
You know.
language, well, I couldn't tell you because we haven't really physically met, so that will be for the next episode.
Did you do any Zoom classes or anything like that? Or
We
Teams
did
meetings?
we did do Zoom class, but
Mhm.
most of it was like online interaction. So, but we
Okay.
had a class online, like we could physically see each other and the other students, which was great. But also it's an asynchronous course, so we're not able to necessarily be present at the same time because people live in different places and different time zones. So it's actually a brilliant solution if you have other commitments as well.
Well, we like to do this, and Jimmy usually takes his part, but I'm going to take it because he knows you. We usually like to dwell or delve into the background of our guest. And I understand that you studied forensic linguistics as well as other languages. I'd like to know about you. What made you pursue a career in languages?
Well, to be honest, my plan was never to pursue a career in languages. I mean, I was really, really interested in crime, and especially the psychological aspects of crime. Those were always the elements that fascinated me the most. And I would read a lot of literature, fiction, true crime, regarding some of the best classics we've had in history, like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Agatha Christie. And so my idea was always to join law enforcement, but at the same time, I was developing quite a good capacity for language learning. I mean, I developed speech language very, very early, and I used a lot of complex, grammatical expressions, and I would imitate people's speech. So there was this gift already since I was a child. Um, and you come to a point in life when you kind of need to make some decisions, and i I realized that due to a couple of challenges that were unexpected and came my way, I couldn't really go the law enforcement route, which I had always dreamt of. And so basically language became some sort of a plan B for me. But the interesting thing is that somehow, things come together, and I ended up studying something that is very related to law enforcement and criminal justice and all of that. But it took me on quite a journey, which has led me through many different countries around the world, studying at many different universities and picking up on, of course, English, which I learned to read at read and speak. I even learned to read English before my own native language. So I
Wow.
began with the English,
Wow.
continued on with the Spanish for quite a few years. And this is kind of when things were really starting to unravel in my experience and in my history, because during the time I was learning Spanish, I also discovered forensic linguistics. This was something that wasn't really a thing in Norway. It's kind of become something that's quite, recent. This scientific field is quite new in Norway, and so I had to actually go to Spain to even learn what it is or what it was, and also at the same time the Learn School case, which we will be discussing today, kind of became a media spotlight, like quite a dramatic thing that was publicized, and also the letter that we will be discussing, regarding the ransom letter in this case.
And let me add here real quick. I don't think we have to do this for our audience, but just to be clear, linguistics, of course, is the scientific study of language. I'm a linguist and I speak one language, English, sometimes just barely. Christine's a linguist and you speak multiple languages. But it's not always about knowing other languages. It's one is for, you're a forensic linguist. You're then from the French arguing the law. So you're basically working in the courts, in the criminal justice system, and you're applying the scientific study of language to that. So I know we discussed forensic linguistics a lot on Cold Red, but just for maybe a new audience member or 500, that's the definition of forensic linguistics. So there are some people that come into it earlier in life. I came into it way later in life after the Unabomb case. I did well in that case, and then went back to school and got my second master's. Some people, that regular audience know that, but Christine, in your case, you learned a number of languages first. You didn't mention Arabic. You also speak Arabic, right?
I do. Well, I would say I definitely spoke Arabic before the summer. When you have a longer break, a summer break, you need to brush up a little bit. But yes, I speak Arabic and of course English, Spanish, and I can also read and write in Hebrew. Uh, you know, I love languages, and I think knowing multiple languages has really helped me in my job or in my studies as a forensic linguist, because it helps you see and analyze things from a different dimension. Basically, it gives you this added layer to the analysis, which I think is highly beneficial, because you discover things that aren't there in your native language, or you see just peculiarities that you can't necessarily explain until you see it from a different language perspective.
Wow.
What I find interesting too, and we don't have to get anything personal here, and we're not, but let's say you have a very good friend who speaks some other language, but you don't speak that language. You speak, your native tongue is Norwegian. I know of relationships, business, personal, where the two people will find a common language, sometimes English, and that's how they deal either professionally or personally with one another. Would find that very interesting to be in a relationship with someone, again, of any level, and you are speaking a language that's not native to either of you to get by. If you saw the movie Love Actually, it comes out every Christmas time, of course, or whenever you want to watch it. But there's a whole segment in there about a guy that falls for a woman. I guess she's Portuguese, and he's British, and they can't even really understand each other. So I know that happened in your life in different phases where you're actually speaking English to someone and neither of you are native English speakers. I find that very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also, because I started with English so early and also Spanish relatively early in high school, I think I've developed, certain strengths in either of them. So I would say that, I have like my emotions, I can describe them best in the English language. Norwegian, not so much, to be honest, because there are some limitations to how I can express things. But Spanish, I have definitely the best vocabulary. So usually when I'm stuck, I can't remember a word, it comes to me in Spanish. And so, Arabic is also a great language to curse in, for example, when you're angry. So you have many opportunities that you wouldn't have if you only spoke one language.
Well, listen, off camera, you got to teach me a couple curse words so that I can
Oh,
say them to Jim when we're on the show and he won't know what I'm saying.
well, I would love to, Ray. I will definitely give you a one-on-one session and teach you
But
the best Arabic curse words. I mean, yeah, it will blow your mind.
And
yeah,
Christine, can you separately tell me what you told Ray and then how I can retort to his statements?
Oh,
Thank you.
absolutely.
well, you would probably get along fabulously with my sister. She speaks 5 languages. She speaks French, Italian, German, Spanish, and of course English. So, and she's a high school or middle school teacher and teaches several languages. And she has had a love of language her whole life. And it started with French and it just morphed into 2 other languages. So I get it.
Uh,
I know someone just like you.
Well, that is good to know. And I'm sure we would get along. And there's something about, people who have a fascination for language, either it be different languages or even, the grammatical aspects, you usually find something in common. And, I have to say that also the jokes of linguists are usually the best. There are a few times I've laughed so hard, from hearing a proper linguistic joke that, yeah, it's quite sophisticated and it requires some brain power to
Well, do you
translate
have
and
any?
understand.
You can't leave us hanging. Do you know any good ones?
Well, actually, I do. Um,
All right.
so let me just think. I have the one on top of my head. So, that device that you use to unfold to protect yourself from rain? What would
Umbrella?
you call that? Yes.
Umbrella?
So the one who created it was actually supposed to call it umbrella, but he hesitated.
I like it.
Ah,
Yeah, and
that's good. That's good.
I have quite a few
Umbrella.
cheesy language quotes, and I know I've shared a couple of you with you already, Fitz. So there's more where that came from.
There was a contest a number of years ago for someone to come up with the shortest joke possible. And there was well, of course, it's linguistic because it's language, but the winner, the joke was only 2 words long. And I think our you as a non-native English speaker will get it. I'm positive you will. But it's simply this. You ready? A two-word joke. Pretentious? Moi? You get it,
Pretty
Ray?
good.
I
Yes.
do. I do.
As if some show-off English speaker has to throw in the French word for me, and it's
Right.
moi, whether I
Well,
pronounced it or not. So I thought that was pretty good. For two words, that ain't bad.
well, I actually have one for you too, Ray. No, Jim. Now, Ray, you asked. I'm going to give you one, Jim. So, what do you call an alligator in a vest?
Alligator in a vest. Gatorade? No.
Gatorade.
Uh,
Gatorade.
it's called spontaneous cognitive dissonance, Ray. Okay, but no, that's not it.
Ventilator.
What about you, Ray? Do you have any suggestions?
I would say ventilator.
Well, I think both of you should have guessed this one because it's investigator,
Ah,
obviously.
that is good. That
It's
is
a
good.
good one.
It's been a
So,
while. It's been a while.
it's been a
Christine.
while, crocodile. Yeah.
Been a while, crocodile.
On a more, well, this is even semi-serious, but at the time we're recording this, it's only a week or so ago, and we're not going to get, we don't do partisan politics here, but it is interesting because I belong to a forensic linguistic listserv, and I was waiting for it to come alive with this issue. And former President Trump, about 8 days ago, had a Madison Square Garden rally. There was a comedian on hours before him. He made a joke in which the word garbage was used. 2 days later, President Biden attacked that rally, President Trump, basically saying all supporters, in so many words, of Trump are garbage. And then, of course, his people realized that was not good in an election season, so they changed it. And it all comes down to an apostrophe, where the apostrophe belongs, supporter, comma, S, or supporters, I'm sorry, supporters apostrophe S or supporters apostrophe, and even the use of an M dash, which is there's N dashes, M dashes, how they divide sentences, whatever, into different clauses. We're not going to get into that here, but I was waiting for my forensic linguist colleagues on this list to show up, and sure enough, they're now commenting on that. To their credit, they've kept it nonpartisan so far in terms of whether basically Biden was talking about 50% of the United States citizenry, or just the comic who made that remark. So it's linguistics can get very nuanced in terms of arguing about the placement of an apostrophe. And what's important here, it's going from spoken language to written language, and how there can be problems in translating or transcribing one to the other. And this is all in English. And Christine, I'm sure you have examples of going from one language to another and getting the transcription right. There are many forensic linguists. That's all they do out there is they have specialties in certain languages, and they try to determine what was really said during the police interview. Did the person understand the police officer? Did the police officer understand him or her? And again, I'm talking about when different languages are involved. So it's interesting where life can go, and linguistics can rear its ugly or
Well,
beautiful head,
well, let me
depending
ask you
on
both
the
this.
topic at hand.
Well, let me ask you both this since you went there, Jim. Could the same thing be said for the word deplorables, where there's an apostrophe S before or after?
No, because that was a basket of deplorables that Hillary Clinton called Trump supporters, and
Okay.
and that was clearly no, there was no possessive in there, and that's what this really is. Whether it's a singular person, supporter, comma, I'm sorry, supporter apostrophe S, one person, or supporters apostrophe after the S, which means multiple, two or more people. So again, we're getting into the weeds here, not really
I agree.
we're probably boring Christine because I'm not even sure how much of the story of which she is aware. We're going to cut her video just for that.
Yeah, just one.
The voters in this country will appreciate it, and by the time this airs, we'll know, perhaps where the garbage lies. Anyway, any follow-up questions, Ray? I do know Christine a little better than you because we can get into this case shortly.
No, let's move on.
But actually, no. Before we get into the case, I do want to bring up Um, I do want to bring up the fact that you grew up in Norway. I know you spent some time living in other countries, England, Egypt, to name a few. I believe you visited the United States, correct?
I absolutely did, and I also
Yeah,
have family there.
that's
So
right.
I've been, I usually say across the pond, a couple of times. West Coast, the East Coast, Florida. So, I mean, I've had amazing experiences, and I mean, it's a little distance to travel, but as soon as I get an opportunity, I will go, and maybe I'll come visit you guys.
That would be great.
Sounds like
We'll
a
do it.
plan. Let us know. We're close to each other.
So, give us a little bit of context about Norway in terms of crimes and what's because we're going to talk about a kidnapping, perhaps, and people will know what I mean in a bit. But what's it like living in a big city like Oslo, but certainly in the suburbs or surrounding parts? What's the crime situation like there?
Well, overall, the crime rates in Norway are very low. So we've been very blessed in this way. Um, but it's also when you start to look at the statistics, you can see that there has been an increase in juvenile delinquency, and especially aggravated assaults, unfortunately. But again, trying to interpret statistics is quite difficult without having enough knowledge. And I think also with COVID in the middle of there, everything changed. So one has to take that into perspective as well. But in general, the crime statistics are low compared to other countries. I mean, you can travel, any way you like, and you're relatively safe. I mean, as a woman, there are could be certain challenges. I've certainly had my own challenges, sometimes traveling late at night going home. You might be very unlucky and end up in a situation that could be potentially threatening. But overall and in general, it's a pretty safe country.
However, the one big mar on this Norway's criminal history, certainly in recent years, occurred in August of 2011. Could you share with our audience what happened on that day?
Well, there was a major terrorist attack that took place. It took place in two areas. I couldn't say simultaneously, but it was so closely related. It was the same person involved in both, but one kind of, in a way, a decoy to try to draw attention elsewhere. And obviously, it was also a statement. So there was a car bomb explosion outside of the executive government quarter in Oslo, killing, I think, around 8 people, wounding a couple of others. But the real focus of the mass shooter was at an island called Utøya, which the offender himself dressed up in a police uniform, and he targeted basically politically active youth affiliated with the Labour Party. And this resulted in a massive, tragedy with 77 dead, multiple injuries, and very deeply traumatized people, youth. And unfortunately, a very delayed response by law enforcement. So a lot of civilians were involved trying to help with the rescue. And so this kind of marked a tragedy in Norwegian history in 2011.
Eventually, an individual, we don't like to put people's names on this program, but we'll say a person was arrested and he is still serving time in prison. It's highly unusual to have a mass shooting and a bombing undertaken by the same person. Usually it's two different sort of skill sets. They'll do one, they'll do the other. But this person, for various reasons, was a bit more sophisticated and he decided to do both. And Christine, didn't you tell me earlier you have sort of a tangential dotted line connection to one of the victims, or at least someone who was involved in that case itself?
Well, you see, as a part of my education, I have studied, trauma, shock, the effects of trauma on the nervous system. And so the place where I got my education and where I was, trained in this, she is a very, very highly skilled professional therapist who worked with a few of the victims from the Utøya shootings. And I remember we had some dialogue, regarding this incident. And there was something she told me that really struck a chord, and this might be something people who listen to this podcast can relate to in terms of PTSD and stress reaction after a traumatic incident. She basically said that the youth who were on the island, who were able to escape and swim across, the island is relatively close to the mainland. So those who were able to swim and flee from the crime, or the crime scene, basically, they suffered in much less degree the severe effects of PTSD, because somehow that energy was discharged in the attempt to flee the scene. But those who had to kind of, when I say play, I mean, and quote unquote play dead, the pent up energy that, because it's a fight flight situation, it's life and death. So they ended up with much more severe symptoms of trauma, because they were kind of stuck in this position, couldn't move, they couldn't breathe, scream for help, anything. So it was interesting to see that how your response to trauma can really affect the aftermath of what you go through in terms of symptoms and effects, after effects. Yes.
Very, very tragic story. And to the 77 who lost their lives and others injured.
Jim, I knew we were going to talk about this, so I looked at this a little bit. And when we talk about the individual that committed this act in Norway, there's a couple things here. When we talk about active shooters, he falls within that category. But because he used different methods of hurting people, one was a bomb, and the other was weapons and shooting people, we would call him more of an active assailant. And that seems to be the term when you look that way. But you look at him, and he said a couple things. And one of the things he said, when he was arrested, he did not resist at all. He gave up almost immediately, which is usually kind of interesting in this. Usually, most of these situations end in suicide, but this one did not. He gave up, and when they asked him why he did what he did, he immediately admitted it and said he was trying to save Norway from a takeover of the Muslim population, and which kind of is like a mission-oriented type of individual. So I thought that was interesting in reference to his thought process, and I understand that there's an appeal that's coming up this month in November of 2024, where he's trying to obtain parole from the prison system in Norway. And I don't know. I mean, I look at here in the United States, if you were to kill 77 people, there would be 77 sentences, one for each individual that lost their life. It could be life in prison. So you'd have
times 77, yeah.
Times 77, which means you would never get out. And here they're even considering about releasing this individual who is still suffering from psychiatric problems. And imagine the post-traumatic stress caused by all the people that were affected by this. Do you see that, Christina, that would be something that may happen with this individual?
Well, I think it's very difficult for me to answer that question. I mean, I sure hope not. I sure hope it's not released onto the streets, because, like you said, this would be a massive setback and, difficult situation for those survivors and their families. But you never know, times as the years pass by, there is always a chance, but I really, really hope that this will never be the case, that he will spend the rest of his life in prison, what he deserves, and that he will never pose a threat to anyone else ever again.
Well, let me kind of go back a little bit when Jim was asking you about how life is in Norway. Do you face the same types of problems as people in other countries face, like, for instance, United States? Is there an immigration problem within Norway?
Well, I usually don't think that the problem is an exterior one, if that makes sense. Usually problems, they stem from an interaction between people. So sometimes it's a give and take in a way. So I don't want to point fingers to say that any specific group is the problem, or is the cause of something. I think it's an interaction between who comes and who receives. So I think you should look at it as a whole, and evaluate it from there. Because, as a receiving nation or a receiving country, you have to make wise decision, for people to accommodate new residents where you live. That's why I think, one has to look at oneself first and foremost, and then also make wise decisions when it comes to this kind of politics. Yeah, and I mean, I've been a guest in many countries, and I think also the attitude you bring with you when you go somewhere, how respectful are you of their culture, their language, their customs. And obviously, for example, me being European, going to a Muslim country, or you know a different country with a different religion, you always need to show some level of respect without compromising your own beliefs, of course. But you need to kind of take that into account, that you're a guest somewhere else, and so yeah, make wise decisions based on that.
So where do you think, if you know, and you may not even know this, I mean, he talks about, I'm going to pay the price for saving Norway from an invasion of Muslim people. Is that even realistic, or you think he was just seeing something that wasn't there, or did he have any? Was there any credibility to his statement? In other words,
Well, I think, first of all, the kind of person that he seems to be or comes across, because I think we're dealing with the highly narcissistic personality, maybe
oh
some
yeah,
psychopathic traits, and their reason and logic is usually beyond that of most human beings, to be honest. So you cannot necessarily compare their statements to how normal people think. I think in any case, when people make a statement or a claim, you should take it seriously. And even though if you don't sympathize or necessarily understand, you should at least try to make some effort to see it from their point of view, just to understand at least where they're coming from. And then, incorporate that into to kind of increase basically the understanding between people, and even maybe finding a solution. Because if he thinks there's a problem, I mean, at least listen to what he has to say. And then sometimes you have to disregard something as just complete, vulgarity, or just, something that is not useful. Yeah.
well, I could tell you, in my estimation, this individual was a monster. He really was, and what he did to the people of Norway, there is no. There's no forgiving that. I mean, I guess there is forgiving. There's a forgiveness for everybody, but he needs to. I mean, that's horrible. It's just absolutely horrible what he did.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Ray, we've had a few of those here too in this
Yeah,
country.
we have.
Certain Las Vegas, Nevada, the number was over 70, and yes, and we could spend a whole series of episodes discussing these. But Ray used a good word, monster. Let's segue into one or more monsters that perhaps were responsible for a certain woman named Anne Elizabeth Hagen, 68 years of age, who disappeared on Halloween. I'm not sure it's celebrated in Norway, but October 31st of 2018, a little over 6 years ago, and still hasn't been heard from. Christine, do you want to pick up any part of this story, and let's go through some of the objective facts related to it? And I know you have some analysis you've undertaken. We'll come to that sort of the second part of this discussion. So walk us through what happened as far as you know to Mrs. Hagen.
Yes. So basically, this case, also known as the Lørenskog case, regards, the missing wife of a Norwegian billionaire, one of the richest people in Norway. And so the police believe that she, his wife, was taken from her home in Lørenskog, which is a municipality close to Oslo, in the time period between 9:15 and in the morning and 1:30 on Wednesday, on the 31st of October, like you said, in 2018. So basically, the last sign of life was a phone call at 9:15 in the morning. And so her husband, businessman and billionaire, which also has the same age as the victim, he returned earlier home from work because he was concerned when he couldn't reach his wife. So around 1:30 p.m., he arrived at the house and he discovered her missing and saw certain signs of disturbance, which included, the presence of a ransom letter, which we will be discussing eventually. He also notified the police around half an hour after this, after arriving, and so this all had to happen kind of in secret because in the ransom letter there were serious threats against her life. But we could also, discuss the signs of abduction or at least an incident at the crime scene.
Sure, let's
So,
go into that. Go ahead.
yes. Well, on the chair in the hallway laid her watch and rings, I suppose maybe wedding rings, and the 5-page ransom letter, which demanded 9 million euros in Monero, which is basically a cryptocurrency that is almost untraceable. But there are other clues of an abduction and even maybe possibly murder present at the house. And that includes blood spatter. I think police are not sure if this happened at the time of the abduction or it could have happened at an earlier time because, you know, accidents do happen at the house. Suddenly you cut your finger from cooking or whatever. So it's hard to pinpoint the exact time. But
Let me stop you there. Two things. Did they confirm whether it's her blood or not?
I believe so.
Okay.
I
And
believe
I
so.
also want to give you great credit, even for a non-English speaker. I know police officers, FBI agents say blood splatter. It's not splatter with an L, it's blood spatter when you're discussing the droplets on a wall, on a carpet, on the floor. Ray, of course, knows this. But you ever hear anyone talking and they say blood splatter? They don't know what they're talking about. You obviously do, Christine. Continue.
Thank you. So, yes, also some of the victim's clothes that she had been wearing that day were left behind. Her phone was there with a lot of unanswered calls, a cable tie, and later on, as the police did their investigations, they found traces of cocaine in 3 places at the house. So, I wonder, Ray, what are your thoughts about these clues that are found on the crime scene?
Well, I don't know enough about it yet, but I can tell you when you think of, you talked about a kidnapping and you talked about a kidnap. First of all, kidnappings are kind of rare, but kidnappings for ransom are even rarer. It's usually it occurs in different parts of the world for different reasons. And a lot of times they're significant in a region where there is high levels of organized crime or political instability. But when you look at Norway, it should be very rare because, like you said earlier, crime in your country is almost non-existent. It's actually pretty good. You have such a low crime rate. So
Certainly
incident
compared to the US.
with a lot of countries,
Yes.
and instances of kidnapping would be very, very infrequent. But when you talk about cocaine that's left or cocaine that is found at a crime scene, I've never known a kidnapper to bring cocaine with them to a crime scene where they're going to kidnap somebody. I've never seen that happen in all my years of
As
doing this.
rare as they are,
Correct.
there's no reason to bring a controlled substance and leave it behind at the scene.
Right. It
Well,
just doesn't happen. So you ask, then what's the source of that? And the source has to come from someone in that home.
and also, something that is very interesting or curious is that the police suggest that a health app or a step tracker on her phone, on the victim's phone, could reveal when an attack took place. Because, as it connects to your own, to your body or to your levels, that, it indicates something. So there was a sudden drop or raise in the levels. And it suggested that it might have possibly started with a fall down the stairs from the second floor, sometime between 9 and 10 in the morning. But, the sum of all of these clues and findings, in the beginning, the police investigated this case as an abduction, but it later on became a murder investigation. But it was kept under wraps due to the serious threat against her life. And only after many weeks did the police decide to go public with the case.
And let me just interject here. This would be called a no body case because we're not giving anything away here. Mrs. Hagen's alive or dead. She's never been located to this point in time. So for relatively early in the investigation to switch it over or take away from the kidnapping element and make it a homicide. Of course, it could be both at the same time. That was the Lindbergh baby kidnapping case. No one really thinks Bruno Hauptmann intended to kill the toddler when he did, but he still kept up the premise of a kidnapping. This is the early 1930s, of course. So who knows if the woman fell down the steps accidentally or was pushed, and somehow the kidnapping still proceeded from there, even though if she was actually inanimate, if not deceased. So yeah, some interesting elements here. And I think that was only a month or two into it that the police said it's a murder investigation. Did I read that correct?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how many weeks, but the police decided to go public because they were hoping to get some help from, people who lived in the area who might have seen something, heard something. But there was also, at the same time, I think when it went public, at least in the same year, the police started to shift, the focus towards the husband and started a covert investigation against him because they believed he had motive to want her life.
And
one thing, Jim, and I don't know if
I know where you're going to go, Ray. Go ahead.
I know if you wait a minute. I think you'll kind of remember this. At least I hope you do. There was a case that Jim and I looked at 4 or 5 years ago, where a woman disappeared and later turned up dead the next day or 2 days later, and they used her Apple Watch to determine her heartbeat of when she actually died. And when her heartbeat, when you're running or you're doing something, you're under the influence, your heart regulates by different things in that app.
And blood pressure, other factors
Correct.
too.
I wonder if the police have access, because if you're doing something with steps, especially if you're a billionaire, usually you're going to have every other gadget that watch is going to be able to do for you. So I'm thinking that she probably also, maybe she didn't, maybe it was just to monitor her steps, maybe not. But I would think, or maybe hope, that it had other indicators where it could monitor other things, not just steps.
But something that is interesting to mention when you say this is that despite, being the wife of a billionaire, the two of them lived an extremely, very low-key, humble life. There was you wouldn't guess that that was the house of a billionaire, of a rich person. So there's a lot of, elements that you have to take into consideration when analyzing this. And let's hope that there was more application or more information from that app that could have given better indications of what exactly happened and when. But it definitely seems like an attack took place around that time, or even, like you suggested, could have been fall down the stairs, either voluntarily or that she was pushed.
And where I thought Ray was going, but he also brought up a good point, regardless about those life watches. They have all different names they go by. But in any homicide investigation, there are these figurative concentric circles that are put around the victim. And the closest, since over 85% of homicide victims are in fact killed by someone they know, investigators always start at that inner circle. And they have to rule in or rule out loved ones, husbands, wives, kids, siblings, etc. Then they go to neighbors, and they go to workplace, and the concentric circle builds out. So for the police to early on focus on the husband, that was a very logical thing to do. Interesting from what I read and what you said, they did it covertly, which means I guess they were getting phone records and who knows, travel records, tolls, anything like that to see where he was, maybe before they gave like a hard interrogation of him. So that was probably the covert part of it. So give us, so the letter, we're going to get more into the letter later, and there was other communications that came up, but walk us through now what else from just the objective facts of the case as far as you know them at this point. What comes next?
Well, I think this operation, regardless of what it was, if it was a real kidnapping or if it was murder, it's quite certain that we're dealing with professional actors here, because this is not a one-man job. This had to be planned in detail for a long time, because we're also following this crypto trail, to be able, for the victim's husband to be able to communicate with the kidnappers, there was set up a crypto trail and some sort of communication. And I don't know too much about it because I'm not an IT expert, but it seems like there was a lot of, they sure took their effort and time to make this as solid as possible, even though some experts now are looking at the evidence regarding that crypto trail, that it's not as solid as it might have seemed in the beginning. But there's definitely some efforts put into place to try to establish some sort of contact, exchange of information. So it's definitely not a one-man job. And obviously someone had to be at the house and collect her. And I don't think that was also, it must have been a couple of people involved in that. And of course the masterminds behind it. So I'm not really sure how many people it would be reasonable to consider, but definitely professionals, I would say. And also, we don't know if she was taken and if she was kept somewhere abroad or if she was kept in Norway. So there are many, many questions regarding this case. But as of today, there are two current theories. And in both of them, the victim is dead. One is that she was killed at the house. And the other is that she was killed later. It could have been, result of an accident, or she had, health issues or whatever, I don't know. But it could have been also a result of the kidnappers not wanting to be found.
Was any money, crypto, coin, or otherwise, ever actually paid, as far as you know?
As far as I know, yes, a sum was paid, but it was not the complete sum of 9 million euros that was demanded. I believe some sort of deposit was transferred, which was quite less than what they were asking. And there was some discussion regarding this, but to the best of my knowledge, I don't know. I don't think that the full price was paid, not even maybe close.
And wasn't there something about, and I'm using air quotes, a crypto man that the husband met somehow? It reminds me of Lindbergh meeting the kidnapper in a cemetery in the Bronx in the 1930s. It's kind of rare when the victim meets with the kidnapper in some shady way to exchange money, ransom, whatever. What happened with this crypto man meeting, allegedly?
Well, I don't know really anything about the meeting. The only thing I've heard suggested that this was some sort of investment plan, or that the husband wanted to invest in some sort of crypto, and so therefore they set up a meeting. But in the end, there is definitely a strong trail following this lead, and so he is one of, I was going to say 4 suspects, which has been reduced to 3 at present time, but he was one of the 4 suspects. And there was also another man who had access to a stolen passport, which was used to establish this trail with the Bitcoin, or the Monero, which is also called, with the stolen identity. So there's definitely an element here that the police are following, and how much involvement they had with each other, at what level, that has not been shared.
Ray, you think what I'm thinking? We have a good bit more to go here. What do you say we get?
I'm going to get it all in this episode, Jim.
With that in mind, I'm going to make call an audible here, Ray. Go back to your football days. Christine, would you be willing to come back and talk about the next stage of this investigation in which you played a role, at least sort of on the outside of it? You willing to come back?
I would love to, definitely.
Okay. All right, folks, we're going to make this into a two-part episode, and I want to thank everyone here for tuning in this time. Make sure to subscribe to the Cold Red podcast. Follow us on Cold Red social media platforms, coldredpodcast.com, and like, subscribe, all those good things you do. I want to thank Matt McLaughlin and Matt Robinson, our producers. Of course, my co-host Ray Carr and Christine, and I'd say a big goodbye to you here, but we're going to see you in a little while. So thanks again, everyone, and see you next time with the episode of Cold Red. Until then, stay safe, be aware of your surroundings. It might just save your life. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Kristen.